Happy Earth Day to everybody. This is planet Earth, which you all recognize, and Earth Day reminds us that this is our home and we need to take care of it. That is our duty, and we need to do our best to preserve the environment around wherever we may live. So in this view of the Earth, you see South America down here, and that's where we're going to be going today. I'll just mention that I've made 2 trips into South America to visit Chile. And at the end of my talk, I will show you a couple of issues of Sky and Telescope magazine, which has sponsored the 2 tours that I have been on. Now, actually, 3 of my previous presentations, I passed through South America, but didn't stay there long. I was on my way to other places. So, for example, we were shortly in Ecuador for a short time and then went to the Galapagos Islands. We went down to the southern tip of South America, both Argentina and Chile, on my way to Antarctica. But in this presentation, we're going to stay in South America for the whole presentation, and we're going to be visiting Chile, which lies here along the western shore of the south part of South America. And we're going to be spending quite a bit of time looking at the Atacama Desert, often described as the driest place on Earth. It's quite large, and there are places where it apparently hasn't rained in more than a century. And there's a variety of different terrains. So, for example, there are some rolling hills, as you see in the top picture. Other areas are flat. Some areas have interesting geological formations. Quite a bit of it is up at fairly high altitudes, as you see in this last picture. And I'll just point out this straddle volcano here in the distance. I won't say anything about it further right now, but towards the end of my presentation, we'll be coming back and having a look at that volcano again. The trip down to Chile, we started in Detroit, flew to Miami, and then from Miami had an overnight flight, which took us down to Santiago, which is here sort of in the middle of the country. This is the capital of the country. And from Santiago, we traveled north to get into the Atacama Desert. So in a little more detail, Chile is indicated here in colors. Here is Santiago, the capital. And as we travel north, some of the cities indicated here we visited, and we'll take a brief look at them. That would include a little bit of Santiago itself, the city of La Serena, Antofagasta, and San Pedro. This red line that you see along here is part of the Pan American Highway. And in my last presentation, we in fact went to the very end of the Pan American Highway down here at the tip of South America. Atacama Desert itself is located in this part of South America, northern Chile, and some of Peru. And the reason that we have this very dry desert is because of the geography and the oceanography that one sees around Chile. So, for example, the Atacama Desert is up in this vicinity. Prevailing winds are blowing out of the east, and they encounter the Andes mountain chain in here. And in passing over the mountain chains, the winds rise and cool, and most of the precipitation rains out before it gets to the other side. So the desert is sometimes described as being in the rain shadow of the Andes mountains. There's also another, not quite as high, but another mountain chain along the coast, the Chilean coastal range. And the same thing happens there anytime winds are blowing in from the ocean. And on top of that, there is a very cold current, the Humboldt current, which is flowing north along the shore of Chile, which leads to a practically continuous temperature inversion, which inhibits the formation of clouds and rain and so forth. So between these two mountain chains, it is very dry, and that's what we're going to be visiting. This dashed line you see is the Tropic of Capricorn, and we're going to travel just a little bit north of that in our visit tonight. So on this trip, starting in Detroit, flying down to Miami, that's about 1,150 miles. Miami to Santiago is 4,120 miles. And then inside of Chile, traveling by both bus and airplane, we will cover about another 950 miles, total distance of somewhat over 6,000 miles, approximately 1/4 of the circumference of the Earth. Chile is approximately 2,700 miles north to south, and east to west at its widest is only 220 miles. And as you've seen from the maps, it's bordered by the Pacific on the west, the Andes Mountains on the east. Population of Chile is about 18 million, and the capital, Santiago, has a population of about 6.3 million, about 35% of the population of the country. And we're going to be encountering the Atacama Desert anywhere from 300 to 900 miles north of Santiago. Fairly large desert, about 50,000 square miles or so in area. And the two visits, which I will be showing you pictures from, happened in September of 2011 and a second visit in March 2017. So I'm going to be showing you pictures from both trips, but we're going to start with the latter one in 2017. And I'm just showing you a picture here of my neighbor's house across the street from my house. And as you notice, there's quite a bit of snow on the ground this time of the year, but we're going to be going down to the southern hemisphere. So instead of the end of winter, we're going to be encountering the beginning of summer down there. So after an overnight flight from Miami down to Santiago, we are descending. And in the foreground, just looking out of the airplane window, you can see the foothills of the Andes. Andes are here in the background. But there is one mountain in particular which sticks out above all the others. This is Aconcagua, a rather singular mountain. This mountain is the highest mountain in South America. It's the highest mountain in the Southern Hemisphere. It is the highest mountain in the Western Hemisphere. It is the highest mountain outside of Asia. At the summit, you are 22,800 feet above sea level. So we have landed. We're in the city of Santiago. We're going to go on a walking tour. This is our tour guide, which is going to lead us around a little bit. And so I've just taken a few pictures now and then of what the city looks like. They have fairly large open mall areas in which the streets are closed off from auto traffic, and we can just walk, which is quite convenient. Number of people in our group, there are about 28 in the group, are amateur astronomers. And so from time to time, I saw people wearing t-shirts related to astronomical observation. This is the Messier Marathon, which is carried out once a year, which people try to see approximately 100 objects listed in the Messier catalog. Here's another one. This says, a little hard to read, it's stars over Katahdin. Stars over Katahdin. If you don't know what Katahdin is the tallest mountain in the state of Maine. And if you're standing here on the summit of Katahdin, you're just 11 feet short of being 1 mile above sea level. The latitude of Santiago is about 33.5 degrees south. So it is semi-tropical, as you see from the palm trees. A similar latitude in the northern hemisphere, 33.5 degrees north would put you sort of midway between San Diego and Los Angeles, California. So we're walking across the central square here, Plaza de Armas. By the way, I have never had any courses in Spanish, so I'm sure some of my pronunciation of places will not be correct. Santiago Cathedral with a quick view inside. And since this is kind of an astronomical tour, we're going to start out the first night visiting the National Observatory of Chile, Cerro Colón, which is operated by the University of Chile, Department of Astronomy, located just 7 miles from the center of Santiago. So they certainly have a lot of light pollution there, at an altitude of 2,800 feet above sea level. And they got a few telescopes. I won't go into the telescopes. They don't want to make this too much of an astronomy talk. But this is where the observatory is. Cerro means hill. So this is Cerro Colón. And here we're on the ground looking into the headquarters entrance. And I'm standing here. You get a lot of things. You can see a little bit of the interior. You can see the name Cerro Colón. You can see the reflection of what is outside, hills in the background, and my silhouette taking the picture. And walking around the grounds, there's a few different observatory buildings with domes on top. I'll just point out this is Dr. Ismar Cintora. He's my traveling companion on this trip. He's a retired vascular surgeon living in Phoenix. So you will see him from time to time, as well as these other people in my photos. This individual is Dr. Patricio Rojo, who worked for the astronomy department, University of Chile, and he's our local guide at the moment. And here he's doing something one should never do. He's looking through a telescope straight at the sun. Now, with a normal telescope, you would burn your retina out in a fraction of a second. But this is a special telescope with special filters, which make it perfectly safe to look at the sun. And you can see features like sunspots, solar prominences, solar flares, and so forth. And he took us on a quick tour of some of the other telescopes on that site. So this is looking down towards the city center. We stayed into the evening and they had a little cocktail party for us with hors d'oeuvres and drinks. And that took place as it was getting dark. And so I tried taking a few shots as it was getting dark, still looking down towards the central region of Santiago. This was a picture that was taken on the first trip as we were taking a little tour around the area, just looking back from one of the hills at the city, one of the modern skyscrapers, taller buildings. And in the background, you can see the Andes up there with a little snow. Okay, we're going to leave Santiago and we're going to fly north. So I'm sitting on the starboard side of the plane, on the right side. I'm looking out at the Andes Mountains as we fly north. And once again, this is Aconcagua. Here in the background. When I was at the South Pole, one of my tour guides down there, Belen, who lives in Argentina, she's a mountain climber and she has climbed this mountain. And she described it to me. Technically, it's not a difficult mountain to climb, but the main problem is lack of oxygen. The air is very thin up here near the summit. Okay, a little further north, looking at the Andes. And where we're flying to is La Serena, located right here at the end of the Elqui Valley. The river flows through here, and so there's a lot of vegetation, a lot of crops which they grow along this valley, the Elqui Valley. So we're going to stay in La Serena, city of about 200,000. And one of our trips, we're going to stay here in Vicuña, city of about 25,000. And as indicated, the squares indicate observatories. And we're going to go to Cerro Tololo and Gemini South. These are professional observatories with big telescopes. Also very popular in this country are smaller observatories run by amateur astronomers. These are tourist observatories. And we're going to go to, in fact, 4 of these on the trip. We're going to go there at night so we can look through their telescopes at the southern sky. Let me tell you, the southern sky is spectacular. The sky is very dark. Even here in the northern hemisphere, it's quite spectacular, but in the southern hemisphere, it's even more so. So we're going to go to El Panga. We're going to go to Mamaluca, another one a little further to the south. It's not on the map. So here we are in La Serena. This is our tour guide for the city for the first trip, Orland. And he's showing us around the central square of the city. And much to my amazement, I discovered a restaurant which was named after me. So obviously I wanted to stop and have a meal here, but unfortunately there wasn't enough time and they wouldn't let me do that. So a little more walking around the central square. Essentially all the cities I visited have a central square, sort of a park-like atmosphere, and it can be quite pleasant. Okay, here's our bus. This is going to take us up to the observatories, the professional observatories. In fact, you can see here in the front window, sky and telescope, just so we get on the right bus. So our first telescope, big telescope, we're going to visit Cerro Tololo Inter-American Observatory. It's about 7,200 feet above sea level in the foothills of the Andes Mountains, about 50 miles east of La Serena. And well, it's managed by NOAO, the National Optical Astronomy Observatories. The largest telescope there is the Victor Blanco telescope, which has the main focusing mirror about 4 meters in diameter, about 13 feet or so in diameter, and some smaller scopes. Most of you probably are aware that astronomers believe that we live in an expanding universe. For many years, we thought that expansion was slowing down because of gravity. But more recently, we have discovered that the expansion of the universe is picking up. It is accelerating. And that discovery was made by using, to a great extent, the Blanco telescope. There were 2 American groups who used that telescope for recording a good portion of the data that was used to first give a strong indication that the expansion was in fact accelerating. We don't know exactly the mechanism, but it is described as being dark energy. So we're going to leave the Elqui Valley and we're going to head south. And for the first time, we can see a couple observatories up here. This is not where we're going today. This is Gemini South. That'll be another trip. But it's, you can see it's getting rather arid. You can see a lot of cactus growing along the road. And as we're getting close to Cerro Tololo, there's a nice viewing area. Again, here is a telescope we'll visit on our second trip. And zooming in a little bit more. Let me just back up. Let me just point out there are 2 telescopes you can see here, 2 telescope domes, but there's nothing over here. That is going to change for our second trip. And say cheese. So a few members of our group are posing for their picture. So this is where we're headed. This is Cerro Tololo Observatory. The Blanco telescope is in the big dome. Aerial view looking down. Blanco telescope here. And as you can see, they just sort of shaved the top of the hill off, or the mountain, and they put in about, 7 major observatory domes. Notice this one right here. We're going to take a close look at that in a couple slides. So just looking back as we go up the hill or the mountain, this is the road we've been traveling on, pretty windy. As we get near the top, this is our view. Now we're at the top. The bus is parked. We're getting out. And I look over at this building I pointed out a couple slides earlier, and I see the little plaque by the door. So I just go up and have a look at the plaque, and lo and behold, University of Michigan. So we have a Michigan connection. The Herbert Deuce Curtis Memorial Telescope. Dr. Curtis, Professor Curtis, was an American astronomer. He worked for several different major observatories, but in 1930, he was hired to be the director of the University of Michigan observatories. And then he died in 1942, but in his honor, his telescope is sitting right down here in Chile. Okay, now this is our tour guide for the observatory here. This is Arturo Gomez. You can look him up on the internet. He is listed there. Looking back over here, Gemini South, the telescope SOAR. And we're looking about 6.5 miles in a straight line as a crow would fly. You're going to go into this observatory building, and this is a reflecting telescope, 40-inch focusing mirror that's 1 meter in diameter. And inside it's a little bit of that telescope. And Arturo is pointing out a few features of the telescope and the detectors. And I just popped my head in one of the offices for the astronomers just to see what they might write on their blackboards, or in this case, their whiteboards. And I haven't tried to decipher this very much. I do see CTIO. That's where we are, Cerro Tololo Inter-American Observatory. CTIO, but I haven't tried to decipher much of it. Now, this is the big telescope. This is the Blanco telescope. A few different views. The primary focusing mirror is down here under these dust covers. The light, the converging light is sent up to a secondary mirror, and then it passes through a hole in the primary mirror down to the instruments that record the images. So Arturo opens up the dust cover so we can see the mirror. And now the dust cover is totally open. So this is our mirror, 4 meters in diameter, about 13 feet in diameter. He also opens the shutters so we can look out and see the view outside the dome. This is that view. It looks pretty dry and barren in the surrounding hills. We're here in the foothills of the Andes Mountains, 7,200 feet above sea level. So he tells us about the telescope, the operations, what they do there. Turns out there's an object out in space that is named after him. It is called Gomez's hamburger. And this is a picture of it right here. So he discovered this back in 1985. He's part of the technical support staff at Cerro Tololo. And what this is, does look a little bit like a hamburger, perhaps. It's thought to be a young star, which is surrounded by a protoplanetary disk. That's a disk of gas and dust, which is condensing into planets. And it's about 900 light years distant. And here we are posing for a group picture by the big telescope. So here am I, and who else is this? Is Dr. Centora, and oh, this person here, I should point out, this is Robert Noya, who was the editor-in-chief of Sky and Telescope magazine, and sort of the directing us for the whole tour, and the local staff member. Okay, now we're going to jump ahead 5.5 years to our second trip, and we're now in Vicuña, and this is the mayor of Vicuña, and his name is, my notes, his name is Rafael Vera. Vicuña is a city of about 25,000, so he has heard that we are staying in town, and he is promoting the idea that Vicuña should become the astronomy capital of the world. So he'd like to get our support behind that, so he invites us up. We exchange a few gifts. On the right is Kelly Beatty, who is a senior editor at Sky and Telescope. He's sort of leading us around everywhere we go. This is Gary Spears, who is head of Spears Travel Agency. He is the one who set up this complete tour for Sky and Telescope. Okay, so we're going to go back up again on our second trip to Cerro Tololo quickly. So here it is up on top of the hill. And here we have a T-junction. If we go left, we go to Cerro Tololo. If we go right, we go to Cerro Pachon, where Gemini South is, for which we have a tour scheduled. There's also a new sign here because they're building a new telescope, still under construction today, but mostly finished, the LSST, the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope. And just to the left is this view area, which we saw earlier. So driving back up to Cerro Tololo, park our bus, and just looking again at the surroundings, which once more look pretty dry and barren. So here's Gemini South, here is SOAR, S-O-A-R, telescope, and here's a new feature that wasn't there in our first trip. So this is the LSST telescope under construction, and we're going to be going over there right after the tour here. So Kelly Beatty is getting a picture of this fellow who pops up in lots of pictures. We've gone into another observatory dome, which has a 1.5 meter telescope. This is the telescope. Our local tour guide is telling us a bit about that telescope and what they do with it. And have a look at its hat. Michigan State. We now have another connection. In this case, Michigan State University. I'll tell you a bit more about the connection in a few minutes. And of course, we're listening to his explanations very carefully. And have our obligatory group picture with this telescope. Dr. Centora, Kelly Beatty, and I'm way over here. And just for a little artistic effect, this is a picture that was taken, not when we were there, but a picture taken when the sun was setting and they've opened up the domes, begin viewing the stars here. But on this trip, we've come back down to that T-junction where the viewing site is, and we're on our way up here, going to Cerro Pachon, going up to be near 3 observatories up here. So this again is the viewing area, 3 viewing tubes lined up with the 3 telescopes up there. And here is something that's new. This has now been officially declared to be the Vista Sydney Wolf. This tells you a little bit about her. She's an American astrophysicist. This beautiful view is dedicated in honor of Dr. Sydney Wolf, whose, can't quite read my screen, whose visionary leadership as director of NOAA, National Optical Astronomy Observatory, director of Gemini, and president of the SOAR board and the LSST Corporation were critically important in the establishment of the facilities you see here on Cerro Pachon. Sydney Wolf was a co-author in a textbook in astronomy that we used at Wayne State for several years. She also she was the first woman to be the director of a major astronomy observatory in the US. That was at Kitt Peak Observatory in Arizona. And she also played a major role in the establishment of six major observatories around the world. And here's a couple of pictures of her, photographs. She is born in 1941, so she is my age. A couple more pictures from her viewing area. So now we're going up to Gemini South Observatory, 8,900 feet in altitude. So this is about 1,700 feet higher than Cerro Tololo was. They have a mirror, which is 8.2 meters in diameter, about 27 feet. There are two Geminis, the Gemini North, which I showed in a previous presentation. This is on the island of Hawaii, the Big Island, on top of Mauna Kea, 13,800 feet. And this one is down here on Cerro Pachon. The adjacent telescope, SOAR, that's an acronym for Southern Astrophysical Research Telescope. It's a 4-meter diameter main focusing mirror. And also up there now and under construction is the LSST, Large Synoptic Survey Telescope, 8.4 meter, about 28 feet in diameter, recently renamed the Vera Rubin Observatory. So we're on the way up there. This is the view we have of the 3 observatories now. This is the latest one under construction. As you see here, the Vera Rubin Observatory. And now we're up here at Gemini South. Another view of Gemini South. And looking over here, here's SOAR. Closer view of SOAR. It's just about a quarter mile away. Turns out Michigan State University has played a role in this telescope. They're one of the partners for the telescope, so they've helped provide funding. Some of the research is carried out on this particular site. And this is just looking back to Cerro Tololo, 6.5 miles in a straight line. This is where we were a couple hours earlier. And zooming in a bit on Cerro Tololo. Going inside the observation dome at Gemini South, we find a clock and a calendar. So the twin telescopes in Chile and Hawaii, this is the time at the 2 sites. So they say that Chile is 7 hours ahead of Hawaii, and that we were here on Wednesday, March 22nd, 2017. That was exactly, 4 years and 1 month ago. Now, these big telescopes are so big that inside the confines of the domes, one cannot really get far enough away with a normal lens to get the whole telescope and the camera at once. But this is part of it. This is a secondary mirror. This is the lower part of the telescope. This part of the platform here rotates. And after our tour, we're back outside ready to leave, looking over at the construction over here of the LSST, or the Vera Rubin telescope. That's what it looked like when we left it in 2017. This is what it looks like today. So it's nearing completion. and they should have observations being made within the next year or two. And here is the mirror. This is the mirror blank from which the mirror was formed. This is a single piece of glass, 28 feet in diameter. This is before the grinding and the polishing of the mirror. 26 tons of glass. And here's a picture of Vera Rubin. She died back in 2016 at the age of about 88 and a half. And she's probably best known for her observations, which led to the discovery of dark matter. She studied the rotation of stars and galaxies and showed that there had to be much more matter than was visible in order for the galaxies not to be flying apart from their rotation speed. Discoverer, if you like, of dark matter in the universe. Now, there were 4 observatories we went to, which are amateur observatories. They're set up for tourists. And these are some of the amateurs who run one of the sites, and you can get a feeling for how big their telescopes are. And here's some observations being made by one of those telescopes. And at another of the observatories, more observations. This is the Milky Way that you see here, our galaxy. And this is a picture that was taken at one of the observatory sites, but with just a normal camera. And once again, the southern sky is quite spectacular, especially when the dark viewing conditions. So here's the Milky Way. This fuzzy spot here is the large Magellan cloud, large Magellanic cloud. This is a small Magellanic cloud down here. These are 2 nearby galaxies which are bound gravitationally to the Milky Way. So the Large Magellanic Cloud has about 1 billion stars, maybe 14,000 light years in size, and about 160,000 light years away. This one has about half the number of stars, 200,000 light years away. And a couple other things I can point out. There's a dark nebula, dark cloud right here. This is known as the coal sack. This picture doesn't bring it out very well, but there are 4 stars here which make up the Southern Cross. Shorter time exposure would show them up better. And let me just point out this star. This is a very special star. This one is Alpha Centauri. This is the nearest star to planet Earth, to our solar system, about 4.3 light years distance. The Large Magellanic Cloud, seen through one of the telescopes. And this spot up here is known as the Tarantula Nebula, which is more magnification, looks like this. This is where stars are being formed more rapidly than anywhere else in our local group of galaxies. Another thing that we looked at through the telescope was the Omega Centauri globular cluster. This is a fairly large grouping of stars, about 10 million stars. Range, this is about 150 light years across, 17,000 light years distance. We have maybe 100 globular clusters which are bound gravitationally to the Milky Way. This is the largest. And then time for something a little different. So we have gone to the Capel Distillery. This is where they make pisco, alcoholic drink, pretty strong. They make it from grapes. They ferment the grapes, making something similar to wine, and then they distill that, ending up with pisco, which has anywhere from about 35 to 45% alcohol. So we get a tour of the distillery where they distill what they're making, and then they age it in these oak barrels here for a period of time. They use Madeira grapes. And there was some coming in while we were there. And then after our tour, we go to the tasting room where we get to sample the pisco. Very popular is a pisco sour, in which pisco is mixed with lime, some type of a sweet syrup, and sometimes crushed ice. So we all sampled pisco sours here, and that became a fairly popular drink for most people for the rest of the tour. Okay, now we're going to go about 100 miles further north. We're going to go right up to sort of the edge of the desert, the Atacama Desert. We're going to visit La Silla Observatory, 7,900 feet above sea level. This is operated by the European Southern Observatory. This is a collaboration of quite a few European countries. They got two telescopes about the same size. The NTT, New Technology Telescope at 3.5 meter diameter, and the 3.6 meter telescope. And there's also a sub-millimeter telescope, Swedish telescope, 15 meters in diameter. I'll just point out that the larger telescope is used almost exclusively with HARPS, high accuracy radio velocity planet searcher, and it has been used to find quite a large number of exoplanets, planets in orbit around distant stars. In fact, it's the most successful finder of low mass exoplanets. So this is what the observatory looks like from the air. There's a number of observation domes. Two main telescopes are here and there. This is a view from the side. Okay, so we're now driving up there from La Serena, and you can see the country is getting more arid, less vegetation. And we turn off the main road and head to the east. La Silla is now 14 kilometers. And pretty soon we can see it's a little bump sitting up here on the hill. That's where we're going, and as we get closer, we can see a little more, and a little more, and a little more. So we're going to have to go up these zigzags, these switchbacks, back and forth to get up to the observatory. But first we encounter a gate where we have to stop and be given clearance to continue on. European Southern Observatory, you often see ESO abbreviation. And while we're waiting, about 100 wild parrots come down and just watch what we're doing before we take off again. But now we're going up the road, up the switchbacks. And now we're getting closer. These are the two major telescopes. And this is the Swedish telescope over here. This is the planet finder, the exoplanet finder, sitting all by itself up on this hill. So after we get a view of the telescope, then we get to go out on the catwalk here, walk around outside the dome to look at the surrounding area. This is the telescope itself, the 3.6 meter telescope, finder of other planets. And from the catwalk, we can look around. It is looking quite barren, little vegetation, but not a lot. And looking in the other direction, these are the other observatories that we see. And this is the NTT, the New Technology Telescope here. NTT telescope. And now we're at the NTT telescope looking back at the 3.6 meter telescope. And this off in the distance. So we're going to get a quick tour of the NTT telescope, the New Technology Telescope. And here it is, about 3.5 meters in diameter, 12 feet or so. A few different views of the mirror. They have some fans here to blow air across the mirror to control its temperature. And a little further back, you can see the secondary mirror for the telescope. This is the control room with a bunch of monitors. And here is one monitor. Not too much useful information, but it does tell us the outdoor temperature is 14.5 Celsius. It's 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Relative humidity, 55%. So we'll go over and look now at the sub-millimeter dish. "15 meters in diameter, about 50 feet in diameter. And again, the group picture by this dish. Now we're back in the Elqui Valley. We're going to have a meal. In this particular place, cooks using sunlight, solar energy. They have a number of reflectors, parabolic reflectors like this. They can reflect the sunlight up to whatever's being cooked, get it warm enough to do a good job of cooking. And after our meal, we have a little tour driving around part of the Elqui Valley. There's a river that runs through it, and where they're able to get the water from the river, they can grow things. Otherwise, you can see it's very arid looking. The river is water from the melting snow up in the higher Andes. So when you buy products that say from Chile, this is where some of those products are growing. Okay, now we're going to go still further north. We're going to go to Cerro Paranal Observatory, 8,700 feet above sea level. This is located in the coastal mountain range, in the Atacama Desert. It's the site of the VLT, the Very Large Telescope, which is 4 interconnected telescopes, each with a mirror 8.2 meters in diameter. It's the world's most advanced optical instrument. The nearest city is Antofagasta, 75 miles to the north. And they have a lodging or a hotel there where people who are working there at the time, astronomers, engineers, and so forth, can live. Some people would call it an oasis, and you'll see why. And these 4 telescopes have names in the Mapuche language. I don't know how to speak that language, so I'm not going to try and pronounce the names. But during construction, this is what the 4 buildings that house the 4 telescopes look like. And a little further along, in addition to the 4 large telescopes, there are going to be 4 auxiliary telescopes. These are 2 of them. So the auxiliary telescopes, they look pretty small compared to the big ones, but compared to people, they still look pretty good size. So we are going to take a bus all the way up to Antofagasta. We're going to stay there in a hotel overnight, and the next morning we're going to drive down to the Cerro Paranal Observatory, which is sort of in this vicinity here. This is our first trip to Chile. On our second trip, we're going to fly from Santiago up to Calama. We're going to get a bus and we're going to go to San Pedro de Atacama, and we're going to see 3 attractions close to San Pedro. But on this first trip, we got to drive for many hours, heading north across the Atacama Desert. This is what it looks like. As we go north, it gets more and more dry, and here you essentially see no vegetation. We arrive at Antofagasta at night. It's dark. We're in our hotel, And after breakfast the next morning, we leave and we're headed down to the observatory, heading south. And this is our first view of the ocean, because we're right here on the South Pacific. And now we are driving up to Cerro Paranal, and we are really in the driest part of the desert. There is just no vegetation at all, which we see along the way. This very much reminds me of Mars, pictures I've seen from Mars in terms of the color and some of the formations. So after an hour and a half drive or so, we arrive at Cerro Paranal Observatory. We're welcomed in 11 different languages. And here are the 4 telescopes up on the hill. We're down here a little bit lower at a staging area. Here's the gate that we can't go through until we're given clearance by the guards here. And over here, we'll see better in the next picture. This is basically a disc of concrete, which is the same diameter and the same weight as the individual mirrors in the telescope. And it was used in the construction of the 4 telescopes. This is one of the fellows who was on our tour. These are 4 young ladies on our tour, posing for a picture. And here am I, standing by this concrete weight with the 4 telescopes behind me. So we're going to go down into that hotel, which I described as down this ramp. It's just right below this dome. You might wonder what this bush is doing here, this green bush. Is that a real bush? Is it alive, or is it just artificial, made from plastic? You might guess it's plastic because it never rains here. However, this is a real bush. They truck water up from Antofagasta from time to time to water this bush, keep it green. But they use the water they bring up for other purposes. So inside the lobby of this hotel, it's like an oasis. Swimming pool. As you see, life can be quite nice if you're an astronomer working here. They actually made used this site in one of James Bond movies. Quantum of Solace, maybe? That's what it looks like inside the lobby. If you look outside the window, you can see, well, we're really back on planet Mars. This is the back side of the hotel. No vegetation. So again, this is the layout of the 4 major telescopes, the 4 auxiliary telescopes. And they've now sent a pilot car down to guide our bus up. They don't want us to get lost on the way up. I don't think you could really get lost very easily. And I guess to see that we're not driving too fast. We follow the pilot car. He shows us where to park, and we get out and have a look at the telescopes up close and the surrounding area. More distant telescope. This is the bottom of one of the mirrors, and they have what are called actuators here, pneumatic actuators, which push and pull on the mirror in order to maintain the perfect shape, no matter how it's oriented. And this shows you a top view of one of the mirrors, again, 8.2 meters in diameter, about 27 feet. And a view of the auxiliary telescopes. And a view at night. 3 of the auxiliary telescopes, and you recognize the Large Magellanic Cloud and the Small Magellanic Cloud. And of course, a group photo. Here we are. We're all wearing hard hats. So we get in the bus, go back down, a few more pictures on the way down, again looking very arid. So we go to Antofagasta, we fly back to Santiago to get our flight back to the US. At the Santiago airport, when we go up to get on the plane, here's what we encounter. Cancel. Engine problems. The plane can't fly and there are no spare planes available, so we've got to stay overnight. So we get in a long line and Delta is going to find hotel rooms for us. This line moved very slowly and we're about in the middle of it. And as we're moving slowly towards the desk, people behind us keep crowding in front of us. So by the time we get up to the desk, we're practically at the end of the line. And we're not too happy about that. But it turns out okay after all, because the way they put people in hotel rooms, they first of all started with the cheapest hotels. And once those hotels were full, they moved up to medium price hotels. By the time they got to us, they had only the most expensive hotels in the city, and that's what we got. So here's the hotel they put us up in. And here's another view of the hotel. This was a very fine hotel. This was the Ritz-Carlton. This is the first and probably only time I will stay in the Ritz-Carlton, but I must say it was very, very ritzy. Typical room. Up on the roof, they have a swimming pool, a jacuzzi. So the next morning, I should comment that Delta was very nice. They paid for the hotel room, they paid for the taxi there and back, they paid for all the meals that we had in the hotel, they paid for everything. So before we leave, we're in a new part of the city with a more modern look. We walk around a little bit and looking at some of the buildings. More modern part of Santiago. Okay, going back to our second trip. We're going to fly to Calama from Santiago, take the bus to San Pedro, and we're going to go to an array of radio telescopes called ALMA, which is located right here. We're also going to go up to the world's highest geyser field, which is located about here, about 60 miles north of San Pedro, right here on the border with Bolivia. So we're in the bus going towards San Pedro. This is the wind farm. Bus stops so we can get out and stretch our legs. Look around a little bit. There's a little vegetation here, so it's not as dry as it was back at that other telescope. But over here we go. Here's this volcano I pointed out in my first 2 or 3 slides. A little further along, we stop again so we can look down at these formations below us. See a lot of white stuff here. This is not snow. And then we continue on down a little bit to the town we're going to be spending about 3 days in, San Pedro de Atacama, a couple members of our group. So just walking around town, taking a few pictures. This is a local church. Astronomy is very popular in this town. This is a fairly small town. It's 3,900 population. It's about 7,900 feet above sea level. So we're quite high here. But astronomy is popular because Alma is nearby. And there's also a very large tourist observatory nearby. So for entertainment, they have volcano expeditions, or you can go on an astronomy tour every night. They'll take you out with a telescope, provide you with hot drinks, and they'll talk to you in English. So this is one place you can do that, but not the only. The streets are not paved here, just dirt streets. They do have some nice restaurants. We had some very, very nice food while we were there, but the prices were exorbitant. Look at this dish, $5,000. Another dish, $6,000. $4,500. Oh, wait, these are not dollars. We're in Chile. These are Chilean pesos. 700 Chilean pesos per dollar. If you divide these numbers by 700, then you get much more reasonable prices. $6, $7, $8. This is another place we'll still provide astronomy tours at night. Another place that will conduct astronomy tours. But now we're back on the bus and we're going towards Alma. And here is that volcano again, off in the distance. So we're going to Alma. That stands for Atacama Large Millimeter Submillimeter Array. It's operated by the European Southern Observatory, the US, and a number of other countries. It's an array of 66 radio telescopes, some 39 feet, some 23 feet in diameter, on the Chattanantour Plateau at an elevation of 16,600 feet above sea level. And we're now 700 miles north of La Serena, and we're on the eastern edge of the Atacama Desert. So as indicated, this is the most expensive ground-based telescope in the world, 1.4 or $1.5 billion. I won't go into that. Largest radio telescope in the world. They have detectors that operate at 4 degrees above absolute zero. And we're not going to go all the way up to the radio telescopes. We're going to stop at the Operations Support Facility, OSF, at 9,500 feet altitude. They won't let us go higher because they're afraid we might die if we do. Individual antennas weigh 115 tons, and they're moved by 2 heavy haulers, which have 28 wheels each, and they have the names Otto and Lori, and we will see those in a minute. So here we're turning off the main road and going towards Project Alma. And let's see, we're in a heavy vehicle, a big bus, so we can't go more than 40 kilometers an hour, 25 miles an hour. It's obligatory that we all have our seat belts on, obligatory that we turn on the lights, and we had better follow all the instructions of the guard, security guard. So here's the security guard, here's the gate. Once we get clearance, then we can continue on 9 more miles to get up to the operations area. And once again, here's that volcano. So this is about the closest that we get to this stratovolcano. This is on the border with Bolivia. It's about 20 miles away, as you see it here. We got some wild burls out here. If you're a little bit closer, it would look like this. This is Lycancabur. At the very top, there is a crater, volcanic, and at the bottom of the crater, there's a small lake. This is Lake Lycancabur, about 300 feet down from the rim. It's about 300 feet long, and it's really deep, 5 to 10 feet in depth, but it's one of the highest lakes in the world. The mountain itself at the summit is 19,400 feet above sea level. The highest I've ever been with my feet on the ground, when I was a graduate student, I climbed Mount Whitney in the Sierra Mountains of California. That's the highest mountain in the United States outside of Alaska. That is about 14,500 feet above sea level. This mountain is 5,000 feet higher than that. So the operations center is here, fairly large complex. So we get off the bus Here's our local guide, Paula Flores. She's going to take us around and explain things to us. So here's the porch. Porch doesn't have a very good roof. A lot of open spaces here, but since it almost never rains, that doesn't make much difference. So we're looking, this is the road that continues on up to the radial telescopes. It goes on another 15 miles and it climbs another 7,000 feet in altitude. So this is one of the control rooms. And just by chance, we encountered this individual who spent a little bit of his time explaining what was going on. This is Richard Simon, radio astronomer who works for the NRAO, National Radio Astronomy Observatories. So he's showing a live camera picture, some of the radio dishes. They're all given hard hats for going out to look at the transporters. These are the machines that move the individual dishes, the individual radio telescopes. They weigh about 130 tons. They have 28 wheels each. The driver sits in this hermetically sealed cabin so he can have supplemental oxygen and not pass out while he's driving. So here we are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times 2 is 14, and another 14 on the other side, 28 wheels. This is one of the dishes that they brought down for servicing. And so we go out to see the dish, and of course, an obligatory group photo of one of the radial telescopes down there. And this is what it looks like up on the Chattanooga Tour plateau where the radial telescopes are. One of the transporters there, moving one. Now this, in fact, this is too clean. This looks too nice. This, in fact, is not real. This is just a model. This is what it looks like up on the plateau. This is a real picture. This is what it really looks like. And so there's a grouping of telescopes fairly close together, and then there are more distant ones spread further away. Like Contour is off here in the distance again. So here we're at 16,500 feet above sea level, and this mountain rises yet another 3,000 feet above that. The problem is if you go up here and you're not accustomed to these altitudes, you suffer from hypoxia, lack of oxygen. And in some people that can lead to pulmonary edema, which can very quickly lead to death. So they don't bring us up here. And the people who work up here only for 8 hours at a time, and they're given supplemental oxygen while they're there working. Another view. The view of the telescopes, and once again, large and small Magellanic clouds. Turns out that the Tropic of Cancer passes very, very close to the ALMA telescopes. So on our way down, take a little side tour, and we go to the very place where the Tropic of Cancer crosses the road. This is not our group, this is another group, but we were there and had our picture taken. And the next area we're going to is El Tacio, geysers. This is a geothermal area, covers about almost 4 square miles. It has geysers, hot springs, boiling mud pools, and fumaroles. We had to get up and leave at 4 in the morning because the recommendation is one should be up here 60 miles away from our hotel when the sun rises, because that's when the steam and so forth is most spectacular. These are short geysers. They don't go more than a few feet in height. The very highest ones may be 20 or 30 feet. So here we are before the sun comes up. We were told to bring a bathing suit if we would like, swimming suit, because you can swim there in a pool of pretty warm water. Nobody in our group did. A few more photos. The sun is coming up. Sun's getting higher. This is the highest geyser field in the world. We're 14,200 feet above sea level here, and yet there are much higher mountains off in the distance. Air's pretty thin, noticeably thin. So we have breakfast, look around a bit more, and then we drive back to our hotel. Here's some of the wildlife in the area. I can't identify what these are. We go for a little walk along the canyon rim. Pretty arid, except down at the bottom of the canyon where there's water flowing, greener. Cactus growing along the side of the canyon. And then the last thing on our schedule is we're going to the Valley of the Moon. This is some geological formations carved by water and wind. And they're just 8 miles to the west of our hotel. San Pedro de Atacama, 8 miles to the west. So we walk around and have a look. Group leader Kelly, cool t-shirt. So this white stuff, again, is not snow. These are salt deposits. Valley of the Moon. So we walked probably 2 or 3 miles up here. There's a cavern or a cave, or actually a tunnel that we go through, short tunnel. Come out on the other side. These are people streaming back, having gone through the tunnel. This is a nearby area called Valley of Mars. We were going to go there, but ran out of time, and so we actually didn't go to this site. And then we flew back to Santiago to the airport for our flight back to the US. And we had a few hours to wait. So Gary Spears very generously said that his travel company would take us to a more interesting place. So we didn't have to sit in the airport for 5 or 6 hours waiting for our flight back to the US, an overnight flight. So he got a bus for us and did about a 45-minute drive down to Emiliana, an organic vineyard. And it was certainly much more pleasant being down there than just sitting in the airport. So it's an organic vineyard. They grow these grapes without pesticides successfully. Quite interesting grounds that we can walk around. They have a number of tame animals that like tourists. And at the end, go to the tasting room. And at the tasting room, we get to sample 4 of the wines that they produce, 2 white wines, 2 red wines, and they've specially selected just the right type of cheese to go with each wine. So we get to sample the wines and the cheese. They give us a glass of water to cleanse our palate between wines and cheeses. And they have a lot of wine which is on sale, and a number of people bought a bottle or 2 to take with them. Then back to the airport. Plane was on time, got back to the US with no further difficulties. So that brings me to the end of my talk, my presentation. I thank everybody for your interest. And I can take questions if there are any.
So one a while back, Megan asked, do you know how many staff work at those observatories? Some of those observatories that were displayed?
Nowadays, there are less and less staff on site and more of the observations are done remotely through the internet. So it would depend what they're doing, whether or not they are continuing an observation, in which case there may be relatively few people there, or they're setting up for a new type of observation and they have to modify the equipment. But I think if they're doing an observation for a few days, maybe only 2 or 3 people on site overnight, just to monitor everything and be sure that all the equipment is working properly.
A couple of people were joking about the name VLT. They thought it was a very
The VLT
yes.
telescope.
And then Rachel asked, 10,000 feet is still pretty high up. When you went 10,000 feet there towards the end there, did anyone
Up at Alma, yes.
Did anyone get altitude sickness at that level?
Nope, no, I didn't notice anybody having problems at the Alma for visiting. We had stayed for 3 days in San Pedro de Atacama, which is almost 8,000 feet elevation. So we're acclimatizing. The human body starts to rapidly generate additional red blood cells. If you're exposed, if your environment has less oxygen than normal, as it does as you go to higher altitudes, the body compensates by enriching your blood with more hemoglobin. So we'd been traveling for some time up at pretty high elevations, several thousands of feet, and at 8,000 feet in San Pedro. So going up to 9,600 feet, that was only another 1,600 feet, 1,700 feet higher. It wasn't a big change. And just walking around, I didn't feel it at all. When we went up to 14,200 feet at the geysers, that I felt. That you can definitely tell that you're up where the air is pretty thin.
Does anyone have any additional questions? Feel free to put them in the chat box if you have any more questions. That was just pretty amazing to see all the telescopes out there.
It's sort of the major place for observing nowadays. In the Atacama Desert, around the edges of the Atacama Desert, they sort of have ideal conditions. The atmosphere can be very stable, low humidity, high elevations. The higher you go, the better, because you're above more and more of the Earth's atmosphere. And that atmosphere, through turbulence, only blurs the vision that you have. So there's a number, and furthermore, you can get away from most of the city lights. So the skies can be very dark, and so that's why they built a fairly large number, and they're building more all the time. The Europeans are building the extremely large, the ELT, extremely large telescope, which will be considerably larger than any of the ones I've showed you so far.
Gregory asks, are there any dust problems out there or anything like that?
I don't know the answer to that. Yes, if it gets windy, there probably would be a fair amount of dust blowing around. There's many places you don't have any vegetation to hold the dust down. But we did not encounter any dust problems while we were there. Our tour lasted 8 days in total in Chile.
Was that Santiago? It looked like, was it smog or just maybe fog? It sort of.
Yeah, it looked a little hazy there.
Hazy.
I don't know that it's fog, maybe just general city haze. Yeah, it was hazy. You could see it during the day, you could see it at night.
Oh.
So I don't know if that's from automobiles. 6.3 million people live in Santiago, so it's a large city.
Oh.
I suspect it's probably pollution, city-generated pollution mostly.
Megan asked, do you know how soon the Vera Rubin Observatory will go online?
It should have been online sometime this year, as originally scheduled, but because of the pandemic, it's running behind. I think they're about a year behind. So maybe about 2022, 2023. depending how things go, but it's nearing completion.
Anyone have any additional questions? Sorry, my dog is barking.
Dog's got a question, huh, Steve? Steve, I know you're trying to get the dog to calm down now. Do you know, are you going to do another voting for another presentation tonight?
Yes, I do have a poll. We don't know when the date will be, but sometime this summer, we'd like to have another journey with Jerry. I think this will be the 8th one in the summer. The next one will be the 8th one. Tonight was the 7th, I believe. So it's pretty incredible. So I'm going to put a poll up, and you can vote anonymously for your favorite selection. And I kind of let Jerry explain what each of these choices mean. All right, so where to next? 3 options are US telescopes, sailing and flying the Great Lakes, or seeing the LIGO, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory.
Well, US telescopes. I would show a number of telescope sites that we have visited in the US. US, there are quite a few of them. And I think that we've been to all the major ones, and I won't show all of them. There are too many, but some of the more interesting ones. Puerto Rico, we could go to Puerto Rico and see the Arecibo radial telescope, which unfortunately has fallen down recently, but it was doing well while we were there, and we got quite a few photographs of it, above it, beside it, and under it. Sailing and flying the Great Lakes. We have a sailboat, a 31-foot Cape Dory sailboat, and we sailed in all the Great Lakes, but we sail primarily in Lake Huron, often, or Lake Michigan, going up into the Canadian waters, up to the North Channel, which is very nice. And we've also flown an airplane up in that area. So it would show some pictures from the boat and from the airplane. Primarily Lake Huron, I would think. And then laser interferometry, LIGO. Well, that's a special type of detector for detecting gravitational waves. And there are 2 of them. One's located in Hanford, Washington State, and the other one's down in Louisiana. And we have visited the one in Louisiana. We're planning later to visit the one which is in Washington, but you have to wait for the pandemic to subside before we do that. But we had a very nice tour of the one in Louisiana, given by one of the local astronomers there. We could have a look at that.
There's a couple people that still haven't voted. If you want to, had a lot of votes come in. One person hasn't voted. All right, you have 5 seconds.
I don't think one person's going to make a difference.
No. All right. So our winner was sailing and flying the Great Lakes. So that we're going to be staying local relatively for the next one, which is fitting because this summer you plan on doing some more sailing of the Great Lakes.
That's right. We plan to sail into Lake Michigan a little later, starting about the middle of July.
Well, that'll be really exciting. We really enjoyed all of these, and thank you everyone for giving us your time tonight. And thank you again, Jerry, for taking us on this tour. For all the great. All right.